Today marks 100 years since the first woman was elected to the House of Commons. That first female member of Parliament was Agnes Macphail, elected on December 6, 1921, one of 235 MPs at the time. So let's fast forward to the last election. About a third of the MPs elected were women. That's 103 out of 338 seats. And tonight, we've got three great people to talk to. Jean Augustine, the first African-Canadian woman elected to the House of Commons. Libby Davies was the first openly LGBTQ2S woman MP and the first woman House leader. Michelle Rempel Garner is a current Conservative MP and a minister in the previous Conservative government. When she was sworn in 2013, she was then the youngest female cabinet member in Canadian history. Ms. Augustine, I'll start with you. 100 years since women were first elected. How far have we all come as a society, particularly looking at women in politics, and what do you think still needs to happen?
Well, time for celebration. At the same time, it's important for us to reflect on the fact that it's a work in progress. We're not there yet. Still a way to go. What do parties need to do? What do men need to do? What needs to happen to help better reflect our society in our actual House of Commons? There is much conversation now around the issue of diversity and inclusion. And I think we have to take that conversation into the political arena. I think the political parties have to recognize and realize the importance of the voices of women in any discussion and in any arena that where conversations are taking place. And so the political parties just have to make sure that they have candidates women candidates from diverse backgrounds, women candidates in winnable ridings, because I think that's important. And the men have to recognize that they have to stand back and support and ensure that women are given the opportunity to run in winnable ridings.
So Libby Davies, 103 women elected to this, the 44th Parliament. That's still only about a third of the House. And frankly, compared to a lot of other countries, Canada is way, way behind in terms of women's participation in political life. What do you think needs to be done differently?
Well, first of all, David, it took us a heck of a long time, 100 years, to get to 30%. So I would say that's really been too slow. We've got to make up and really push forward. The UN always used to talk about 30% of any underrepresented group being the needed critical mass to bring about change in any institution. So we have reached the 30%, but as you say, we're still far behind. And I would certainly echo Jean's comments, but I think, I was talking to Jeanette Ash, who's a political scientist who studies women politics, and she made a really great observation to me, and that is that when women run in an election, they're actually very favorably received by the electorate. So the issue actually is with political parties and the barriers and obstacles that still exist. And unfortunately, women often still are relegated to running in ridings that are not considered that winnable. For example, the NDP does have policies about trying to ensure that women are put into winnable ridings and other groups that are underrepresented, because it isn't only about women. It is about, Indigenous representation, about racialized representation. But there's so much more that the political parties themselves can do. They're still steeped in really I would call sort of a sexist culture in many ways. There are still barriers. There's still sort of the backroom old boys club that exists. And even though on the surface it might look like things have changed, there's still those kinds of barriers. So if we do want to move forward and increase the representation to 50%, including diverse representation, then, the political process has to do a lot better.
Michelle Rempel Garner, you're the only person in this conversation who is actually a current member of Parliament. Would you agree with what's being said from your perspective? What has been done? What needs to be done?
Yes, we need more women of color. We need more Indigenous representation. We need more representation from the LGBTQ community, but we also need to build on and overcome the reasons why we don't see participation from women. And Libby talked about these barriers very acutely and accurately, but the reality is in the decade that I've served in office, I just don't see those barriers being removed. And I think that we have to, across party line, recognize those: equity on childcare, equity on pay, sexual harassment in the workplace. These are all issues that we still face. I'm sitting here doing a television interview. My stepdaughter flew in from the US. I'm very proud of her. And at 41 years old, I'm sitting here looking at her across the table and going, what kind of a legacy can I leave for her? And that's what motivates me, is that I don't want in 20 years, in 10 years, in 5 minutes, any woman who precedes me in office to have to go through the same garbage I've gone through, or that Libby's gone through, or that Jean's gone through. We shouldn't be celebrating trailblazers anymore. We need to be celebrating action. And that's what I want to see happen. And I really hope that on this anniversary, all political parties can commit to action, can commit to overcoming these barriers, and understand that when we have more women and we have more diversity in the House of Commons, our country is better off.
You know, Michelle Rempel Garner, we've talked to you about this before, and it will be no stranger to anyone in this conversation about, you speak about garbage, the amount of garbage that women in politics, women in public light, in public life face. When you think about those young women who are in their late teens or 20s now and are looking out at the world and seeing just that amount of garbage and the scrutiny of social media, do you worry that we might end up going backwards? And Michelle, maybe I'll start with you, just because you are in the House now.
I think I'm going to speak after giving that sort of dismal picture from a place of optimism.
Yeah.
I look at my stepdaughters and I see what they're capable of, their strength and their desire for change, and their commitment to seeing better in the world. What I would love to see is that we have more partners for male allies, that there's more commitment to remove systemic misogyny, institutionalized racism from our institutions, and that when there are instances where powerful men get in the way of these objectives, that we don't reward or enable their actions by silence, that we actually see justice through. And unfortunately, sitting here today, that's not something that I can say happens consistently. And I'm tired of doing the emotional labor of that. I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of Libby and Jean, but we've all done that emotional labor, and it's time for others to step up. It's time for the patriarchy to step up. If we really want a just and equitable society, then those are the barriers that need to be removed. And I shouldn't have to be here 10 years into my career talking about the same issues that I did a decade ago. If we want real change, we need to have society behind us and lifting this up with an understanding that this is what is good and just. And that's what I hope we can all commit to on this anniversary.
And I certainly don't want to oversimplify what you're talking about, but very, very clearly this is not a problem women created. So women shouldn't be expected to come up with a solution. That in fact, if men are very often the problem, then perhaps the onus should be on men to be making that change. Libby, maybe I can turn to you and ask you, as you look at young people, young women in particular, who might be considering being politically active, what are some practical things you would say to them that would both be useful and motivating?
Well, I think, first of all, David, it's really important to say that that young women do want to become involved in politics. I talk to young women all the time from many different backgrounds, and they want to get involved. They want to speak out. They want to step up. They want to be at the table. They want to be heard. So the issue that we're facing, I think, is systemic, and it is a matter of changing practice and policies. And I would say to young women who do want to get involved politically that it's really important to find mentors. And that's something that, I think now that I'm sort of out of the house, that I try to do. And I'm sure Jean does that as well. And many of us who have been there, and Michelle's doing that now, to provide that kind of mentorship and coaching. And to give support and resources. But it has to come as well from within the political parties, who have to recognize the barriers that exist. Mm-hmm. It has to come from Parliament itself. We still live under very archaic rules that come from the British parliamentary system of hundreds of years. That needs to be put under a microscope and the spotlight put on it to recognize the systemic barriers that exist that prevent full participation and that prevent giving women and other underrepresented folks the space that they need to reach the potential, because these are awesome people and they need to be heard and they need to be there in the House.
Jean, closing thoughts from you.
Well, I think it's important to reflect on the situation of Agnes Macphail. She was one woman out of 234 men, one woman. The things that were done and said then are being done and said now. The appearance, the tone, your voice, your family situation, all of those things that were on the table, and she seemed to have suffered from criticisms as a result of her being a woman. We see those things still being played out over these many years. Though we've shown the strength, we have the data, we have the statistics, we have the research that show that women's voice in any arena, especially in the political arena, does make a difference for the community, for the country, for the world.
Very good to hear from all three of you, and I would say thank you for your service to this country, which is certainly ongoing in the case of all three of you. Thanks for spending a bit of your night with us. Have a great evening.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.